The phone call that dismantled my life lasted precisely 59 seconds. I know because I sat there, frozen in that sterile, overlit doctor's office, my eyes glued to the cheap digital clock on the wall opposite. Each flickering number was a tiny hammer, chiseling the betrayal deeper into the very bedrock of my soul. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old, and in under a minute, my only child, my Sophia, didn't just sell my house, she took a match to the photo album of our lives and called it a business transaction. The phone had vibrated in my purse, a jarring intrusion in the hushed atmosphere of waiting sickness. I'd fumbled for it, a faint maternal hope that it might be Sophia checking in on my checkup. Mom? That single syllable was all it took for the spark to die. It wasn't a greeting, it was a cold, flat statement. Her voice, once a melody I'd coaxed from childhood stutters, was now clipped, efficient, devoid of any warmth that might betray sentiment. We're leaving for Italy tomorrow. I've sold the Lake Tahoe cabin and the Mustang. We needed the liquidity. Goodbye. Liquidity. The word hung in the antiseptic air, a grotesque eulogy for a lifetime. She reduced it all, every splintered floorboard her father had lovingly repaired, every echo of childhood laughter bouncing off the lake, every silent, sacred morning I'd spent on the porch with David, our hands intertwined, watching the mist rise, to that. A single, sterile financial term. And the Mustang. God, the Mustang. David's 1965 Ford Mustang, a cherry red masterpiece he'd saved for 3 years to buy. The car he'd polished every Sunday with a kind of religious reverence, humming old jazz tunes. The car where his scent of Old Spice, faint engine oil, and the peppermints he always carried still lingered in the passenger seat. It was the last tangible piece of him, 6 months after a sudden, brutal stroke had stolen him from me right at our kitchen table, mid-sip of his morning coffee. He'd just leaned over, kissed my forehead, and whispered, "Good morning, my love." Those were his last words, the last of a million such mornings. And now our daughter had sold it, as if it were a used appliance. I sat on that unforgiving green plastic chair, the sharp edge digging into my thigh, surrounded by the muted coughs and weary sighs of other patients. I waited for the dam to break, for the hot, shameful tears of a discarded mother to come. But they didn't. Instead, a strange, glacial calm settled over me, so profound it was dizzying. It was the quiet at the absolute center of a hurricane, a stillness more unnerving and powerful than any screaming gale of grief. Because in that vast, silent void she had created, I remembered the box. David. 3 days before he died, he'd called me into his study. The afternoon light was slanting through the bay window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. He was standing by his old oak desk, his back to me, his shoulders, usually so broad and sure, seemed stiffer. When he turned, his eyes, which had always twinkled with a secret, shared mischief just for me, were shadowed with an uncharacteristic gravity. "Eleanor," he'd said, his voice a low, beloved rumble. He held a simple, polished mahogany box, about the size of a large book. It was beautiful, unadorned, the wood warm and rich under my fingertips as he pressed it into my hands. His grasp was firm, lingering. "I need you to keep this safe. Put it in the top drawer of my dresser. Don't open it. Not unless, if anything ever happens to me, you open it when you feel truly lost, when you can't see the path forward, but not before. You'll know the moment." I'd been puzzled, a little amused. "David, what is this? A treasure map?" I'd teased, trying to lighten the strange mood.
A ghost of a smile had touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Something like that, my love. Just promise me." "I promise," I'd said, standing on my toes to kiss his cheek, the box feeling both insignificant and immensely heavy in my hands. In the raw, gut-wrenching chaos that followed his death, the suffocating grief, the endless funeral arrangements, the parade of well-meaning neighbors with their tuna casseroles, I had tucked the box away in the designated drawer, and in my numb, shattered state, I had forgotten it. It had become just another part of the landscape of my loss. Sophia had been so present then, or so I believed. She had swooped in, taken charge of the paperwork, her efficiency a sharp contrast to my fog of despair. She'd been the one to suggest with a cloying sweetness that I see a doctor for a full checkup. "You need to take better care of yourself now that you're all alone, Mom," she'd said, her smile not quite reaching the calculating coolness in her eyes that I now, with the clarity of hindsight, could see plain as day. It was all a performance, a carefully orchestrated prelude to this very moment of abandonment.
The nurse finally called my name. The doctor, a young man with a kind, tired face, poked and prodded, listened and tapped. He pronounced me in remarkably good health for my age, advising more rest, more leafy greens, less salt. I nodded and smiled, a perfect, fragile pantomime of the vulnerable, fading widow I was supposed to be. But behind my eyes, my mind was a universe away, already home, already walking up the path to our quiet house, already pulling open that top drawer. The bus ride home was a surreal, silent film. San Francisco streamed past my window, the iconic painted ladies, the bustling cafes of Union Square, the steep, impossible hills, but I saw none of it. I was trapped in a reel of memories, each one tainted by the new, ugly truth. I thought of Sophia's husband, Mark. He'd always viewed me as an inconvenient relic, a piece of dated furniture that cluttered his sleek, modern vision of life. His smiles were thin, strategic things, never reaching the cold, assessing depths of his eyes. This scheme, this brutal efficiency, had his fingerprints all over it. I could almost hear him in the background of that phone call, coaching her. Liquidity. My house, the one David and I had bought as young, hopeful dreamers with more love than money, was shrouded in a deep, waiting silence when I entered. It felt different now. The familiar shadows in the hallway no longer felt lonely. They felt conspiratorial, as if they were holding their breath with me. I didn't bother taking off my coat. I walked straight to our bedroom, my sensible shoes echoing on the hardwood floor. My heart was a frantic, wild bird beating against the cage of my ribs. The drawer slid open with a soft whisper, and there it was, the mahogany box. It seemed to gleam in the dim room, holding its breath. I carried it to the edge of the bed we had shared for nearly 5 decades, the mattress still permanently dipped on his side. I sat down, the weight of it profound and significant on my lap. For a long moment, I just stared at it, my fingers tracing the smooth, polished lid. This was it. This was the moment David had foreseen, the moment I felt truly, utterly lost. With a final shaky breath, I lifted the lid. The contents did not simply surprise me. They stole the very air from my lungs, leaving me lightheaded and gasping. It wasn't just a few sentimental documents or a heartfelt final love letter. It was a cataclysm, a complete rewriting of my reality. On top, resting on a bed of crisp, legal-sized papers, lay a single sheet of vellum covered in David's familiar, elegant script. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, the sun has set on my time with you, and the world has grown dimmer for you, as it has for me at the very thought of leaving you. Forgive my secrecy, my love. It was a burden I carried gladly. I never wanted you to lie awake at night worrying about markets and investments. I never wanted the shadow of our wealth to fall across the simple, pure joy of our lives together, or to influence the love in our daughter's heart for us. I wanted us to be loved for who we were, not for what we had. Beneath the letter, the truth unfolded in a series of cold, hard facts that felt more fantastic than any fiction.
There were property deeds, not just for the Tahoe cabin, but for 6 other properties, each one more staggering than the last. A sleek, modern condo in the heart of Nob Hill, a charming 12-room boutique hotel nestled in the vineyards of Napa Valley. And then, the document that made my hands tremble so violently I nearly dropped the entire box. The deed and corporate ownership papers for the prestigious 20-story Pacific Crest Towers in Pacific Heights, the very building where Sophia and Mark lived in their sprawling panoramic apartment. According to the complex corporate structures and stock certificates nestled alongside, David had been the silent, controlling owner for over a decade, and I was now the sole heir and beneficiary of the entire holding company, Vance Legacy Holdings. There were bank statements from private, exclusive institutions I'd never heard of, with balances so long they seemed like a fantastical typo. My David, a dedicated civil engineer for 40 years who'd packed a brown bag lunch every day, had been a clandestine financial genius, a silent partner in 3 separate tech startups, quietly multiplying every sacrifice, every saved penny we'd ever made into a fortune I could never, ever have imagined. His letter continued, the words burning into my mind. Our daughter, my love, my greatest joy and my deepest fear. If she knew the extent of our means, I feared it would warp her, that it would become a lens through which she saw everything, including us. Protect her from that if you can. Use this not to spoil, but to safeguard. Be the strength I know you have always been. The irony was so profound, so exquisitely painful, it was almost beautiful. Our daughter had discarded me, thinking me a financial burden to be managed and downsized, when in reality, I owned the very land she walked on, the very roof that sheltered her. She had sold my memories for what she thought was a fortune, a pittance that was less than the annual property taxes on a single one of my assets. That night, I didn't sleep. I was a ghost in my own home, pacing the quiet, familiar rooms, running my fingers over the worn fabric of David's favorite armchair, the one Sophia had always rolled her eyes at, calling it a relic. I looked at the family photos lining the hallway, a particular one of a 5-year-old Sophia, her face a perfect O of delirious joy, her pigtails flying as David held her upside down, both of them consumed by helpless laughter. Where had that joyful, trusting child gone? When had she been replaced by this cold, avaricious stranger who saw family heirlooms as liquid assets? The dawn came, pale and indifferent, and with it the phone rang again, slicing through the morning silence. Sophia's voice was different, softer, laced with a syrupy, false concern that set my teeth on edge. "Mom, how are you holding up?" A pause, expertly timed to simulate empathy. "I just wanted to let you know we transferred the funds from the sale. We deposited your share into your checking account. Well, it's not much, but it should help for a few months while you know, look for something smaller." "My share?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral, a masterclass in restraint. I closed my eyes, picturing David's face, drawing strength from his memory. "Yes, Mom," she said, as if explaining something simple to a very slow child. "Of course we weren't going to leave you with nothing. That would be cruel. We gave you 30%. That's fair, right? Edward has a phenomenal, once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity in Tuscany, a vineyard. It's going to be our future." 30% of my own possessions. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, the condescension wrapped in the language of fairness and generosity. A fire ignited in my belly, a cold, clean flame. "I see," I said, My voice a soft, unreadable whisper. And when do you leave? This afternoon. Our flight is out of SFO. We'll be gone at least 6 months, maybe a year if things go well. But don't you worry, she added, her tone dripping with patronizing reassurance. When we get back, we'll help you find a nice little apartment. Something more manageable. More manageable. Like I was a senile pet to be kennelled. The final piece of the mask snapped into place. Okay, Sophia. Have a safe trip. Oh, Mom, she gushed, the relief in her voice so palpable it was almost a physical thing coming through the receiver. I knew you'd understand. You've always been so gentle, so compassionate. We love you so much. When the line went dead for the second and final time, I stood there for a full minute, the cold plastic receiver still pressed to my ear. Then I did something I hadn't done since the first week after David's funeral. I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a raw, incredulous, and liberating burst of realization at the sheer cosmic absurdity of it all. My daughter had committed fraud against me, patronized me, and abandoned me all to fund a delusional fantasy life with a man who undoubtedly saw her as a useful idiot with access to capital. I walked to the front window, parting the lace curtain with one finger. Right on time, a sleek black taxi pulled up to the curb. Mark emerged first, his posture arrogant, barking orders at the driver. He loaded suitcase after expensive suitcase into the trunk. Then came Sophia, looking every bit the entitled expatriate socialite in a cream-colored travel outfit and oversized sunglasses, despite the San Francisco fog. They kissed, a quick, perfunctory peck, then laughed at some private joke. They slid into the back seat of the cab, and without a single backward glance at the house, at the mother, at the history they were leaving behind, they drove away. As the taxi disappeared around the corner, I let the curtain fall back into place. The room was dark again. I turned and looked at David's mahogany box, sitting serenely in the center of the kitchen table, where I had left it. The calm I had felt in the doctor's office returned, but now it was no longer passive. It was filled with a sharp, crystalline purpose. It was the resolve of a general surveying a battlefield. I picked up the phone, my hand now perfectly steady. I dialed the number from Mr. Alastair Thorne, the venerable lawyer who had handled David's will and our estate planning for 30 years. He had been at the funeral, a tall, dignified man with kind eyes and an unshakable calm, who had pressed my hand and told me, "Eleanor, if you ever need anything, anything at all, do not hesitate." His secretary put me through immediately. "Mr. Thorne," I said when his calm, measured voice came on the line. My own voice was different now. It was no longer the hesitant, grieving widow's. It was clear, steady, and carried the unyielding tone of a client. "This is Eleanor Vance. I need to see you. Urgently. I've found some documents from David that I need you to explain, and then I need you to help me execute a plan." As I hung up, I knew my life of quiet, predictable widowhood was over. The stage was set. The performance of a lifetime was about to begin. I would play the part of the helpless, forgiving mother to perfection, all softness and resigned acceptance, but behind the scenes, in the quiet offices of Thorne and Associates, and in the silent fortress of my own heart, I would orchestrate a lesson for my daughter. It wouldn't be a lesson of revenge, but one of consequence. A lesson in humility, in the weight of a broken promise, and in the true, unyielding, and formidable strength of a mother's love. She thought she had left me with nothing, but my dear, foolish Sophia had no idea that the woman she was so carelessly underestimating was now the one who held every single card. The silence my daughter left behind had been a vacuum, and nature, as they say, abhors a vacuum.
Into that quiet emptiness rushed a storm of my own making, a tempest of quiet paperwork and silent reclamation. For 3 weeks, I lived a double life, a performance worthy of a stage. By day, I was Eleanor Vance, the gently fading widow, tending her garden, accepting condolences from neighbors for the tragedy of being abandoned by her only child. I perfected the art of the fragile smile, the slight tremor in my hand as I accepted a loaf of banana bread from Aurora, my well-meaning but relentlessly nosy neighbor. "She'll come to her senses, Antonia," she'd cluck, her eyes bright with the thrill of my misfortune. "You'll see, Europe will change her." If only she knew. I'd simply nod, my eyes downcast, playing my part to perfection. But by night, and in the pristine, hushed confines of Mr. Thorne's office, I was someone else entirely. I was the CEO of my own resurrection, the silent architect of a lesson in consequences. Mr. Thorne, to his credit, never once questioned my motives beyond an initial, concerned, "Eleanor, are you absolutely certain about this path? Legal action would be swift." I was certain. Swift justice was not justice at all. It was merely punishment. What I sought was transformation, and that required time, pressure, and the unyielding grind of reality. The first piece of my plan clicked into place with a satisfying finality. Mr. Thorne called one crisp Tuesday morning. "Eleanor, it's done. The sale of the Lake Tahoe property has been nullified. The buyers were understandably upset, but they were made whole. The cabin is yours again." A wave of visceral relief washed over me, so powerful I had to sit down. My sanctuary, David's sanctuary, was returned to the fold. But the true masterpiece was yet to come. The Pacific Crest Towers, the glittering glass and steel monolith where my daughter had lived her life of entitled luxury, was now fully, undeniably, and directly under my control. The administrative veil of the holding company was lifted. I was no longer a silent partner. I was the owner of record. It was from this position of unassailable power that I instructed Mr. Thorne to draft the letter. Not an angry missive, not a threat, but a cold, formal, and impeccable legal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. I pictured it arriving on her doorstep in Italy, a crisp white envelope amidst the romantic chaos of her new life. The thought was a balm. But the universe, it seemed, had its own sense of timing. The storm reached Sophia long before my letter ever could. It was Aurora, of course, who brought me the news, her face flushed with the effort of rushing to my door. "Antonia, you'll never believe it. My cousin, he works at the bank. He said Mark is in terrible trouble. Loans, forged documents, and Sophia. They're saying she's coming back. Alone." The news was a seismic shift in the landscape of my plan. Alone. The word echoed. Edward had discarded her, just as she had discarded me. The poetic symmetry was almost too perfect to be believed. I felt a treacherous pang of something, not quite pity, but a sharp maternal recognition of a pain I knew all too well. I squashed it. This was part of the lesson, perhaps the most important part. I saw her before she saw me. From my living room window, I watched a taxi disgorge a single, haggard figure onto the curb. This was not my Sophia. This was a ghost of her. A pale, shrunken imitation. The expensive clothes she'd left in were replaced by a wrinkled travel outfit. Her hair a lank, unwashed curtain around a face etched with a devastation that no amount of money could fix. She stood for a moment on the sidewalk, staring up at the apartment building that was no longer hers, a stranger on her own doorstep. I saw her speak to the doorman, a man who had greeted her with obsequious deference for years. He shook his head, his posture now of bureaucratic indifference. I saw her shoulders slump, a gesture of such profound defeat that it was all I could do not to run out to her. But I didn't. I let her stand there in the cold, let her feel the first bitter chill of having nowhere to go.
Her phone call came an hour later, her voice a broken rasp, so unlike the cold, clear instrument that had shattered my world. "Mom?" A single, shattered syllable. "Mom, I need to come over. I need to talk." "Of course, honey," I said, my voice the very picture of gentle concern. "This is always your home." When I opened the door, the full force of her collapse hit me. She looked a decade older. The light of arrogant certainty that had always burned in her eyes was extinguished, replaced by a hollow, terrified darkness. For a fleeting second, I thought she might embrace me, but she stopped short, as if the memory of her own cruelty erected an invisible wall between us. We sat at the same kitchen table where I had first uncovered David's secrets. She looked small and lost in the chair, a stark contrast to the woman who had so confidently informed me of my downsizing. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she began, the words tumbling out in a choked rush. "The way I left, the things I said, they were horrible, unforgivable."
Shh, I soothed, pouring her a cup of tea. My hands were steady. It's in the past. Tell me what happened. And so the story poured out, a sordid, predictable tale of lies unraveling. There was no vineyard in Tuscany, no business opportunity. It was a pyramid scheme, a house of cards built on Mark's insatiable greed and towering ego. The money from my cabin and David's Mustang was gone, vaporized, and with it the last of Mark's feigned affection. He had disappeared one morning from their Rome hotel room, leaving behind a stack of unpaid bills and a final cruel note. He'd been seeing a 24-year-old waitress for months. The liquidity she had so prized was now funding his escape with another woman. "But that's not the worst of it, Mom," she whispered, her tears finally falling, splashing onto the worn wood of the table. He took out loans, huge ones, using our apartment as collateral. He forged my signature. The banks, they're coming after me. And then this." She slid a crumpled piece of paper across the table. It was the eviction notice. She had received it this morning. "I don't understand. I have nowhere to go. I have no money. I have nothing." The irony was so thick, I could taste it. She had nothing. She who had taken everything from me now sat in my kitchen, penniless and homeless, while I, the woman she thought had nothing, owned the very walls that were rejecting her. "What are you going to do?" I asked, my voice soft, non-judgmental. Her answer was the one I had been waiting for, the key that unlocked the next phase of my plan. I thought maybe I could stay with you, just for a little while, just until I can find a job, get back on my feet. I won't be a burden, I promise. There it was. After kicking me out of my own life, after selling my memories, after treating me like an inconvenient piece of her past, she was asking for sanctuary from the very tragedy she had created. I looked at my daughter, this broken, desperate woman, and I felt the complex, painful tangle of a mother's love and a strategist's satisfaction. "Of course, honey," I said, reaching across the table to cover her cold hand with mine. "This will always be your home." The gratitude in her eyes was a painful thing to behold. She had no idea she was stepping from one of my properties into another, that her refuge was the central command of the very force that was dismantling her world. The following days were a study in surreal contrasts. Sophia moved her 2 suitcases and a single cardboard box, the pathetic sum total of her previous life, into her old childhood bedroom. I watched her try to navigate her new reality, the humiliation a constant companion in her every movement. The woman who had hosted charity galas was now learning to budget for groceries, her hands shaking as she counted out coupons. It was during this time of shared, strained domesticity
that the second part of David's puzzle revealed itself. Sophia was unpacking a box of Mark's abandoned things, a painful task she'd been putting off, when she found it. Tucked inside a forgotten briefcase was another, smaller mahogany box, a perfect sibling to the one I had in my possession. It had my name etched on a small brass plate. "Mom?" she said, emerging from her room with the box held before her like a holy relic. "Look what I found. It was in Mark's things. It has your name on it." My heart stuttered in my chest. Another one? "David, you brilliant secretive man, what else did you leave us?" We opened it together on the kitchen table, the scene a bizarre mirror of when I had opened the first one alone. Inside was not a fortune, but a single, small, tarnished silver key and a short note. "My Eleanor, if this has found you after the first, then our girl is in the storm. This key opens Safety Deposit Box 712 at the main branch of Wells Fargo on Montgomery Street. What's inside is a piece of our history. Use it to help her find her way back, but use it wisely. All my love forever, David." Sophia's eyes were wide, a flicker of the old avarice, now born of desperation, igniting within them. A safety deposit box? Dad had a safety deposit box? What do you think is in there, Mom? It could be the answer. It could be enough to stop the banks, to get my life back. I watched the hope bloom on her face, a fragile, dangerous flower. She was still looking for the easy way out, the financial Hail Mary that would erase the consequences instead of teaching from them. She was still her father's daughter in that moment, believing a monetary solution could fix a spiritual problem. "I don't know, honey," I said, feigning a cautious uncertainty. "Maybe it's just old family papers. Maybe we should leave it be." "But Mom, we have to look. It could be anything. It could be what saves us."
Us. The word hung in the air. There was no us in her mind when she had the money, but now, in her destitution, I was suddenly part of her collective. The calculation in my embrace when I finally hugged her was not just cold strategy, it was the painful acknowledgement that my daughter had not yet learned the lesson. She had only learned that she was suffering. And so, I agreed. We would go to the bank. I would let her see what was inside. I would let her clutch at this final straw, this last gift from her father, and I would watch as she reduced it, too, to a number on a spreadsheet. It was a necessary step on the path to rock bottom. She had to be the one to choose to sell her history. I would not do it for her. The education of Sophia Vance was not yet complete, and the most painful part of the curriculum was still to come. The air in the main branch of Wells Fargo on Montgomery Street was cool and still, a sacred silence that seemed to swallow all sound, smelling of old money, polished brass, and the faint, sweet note of lemon wood polish. It was a stark, chilling contrast to the tempest of desperate hope raging within my daughter. Sophia clutched the tarnished silver key as if it were the last lifeline on a sinking ship, her knuckles white with the strain, her entire being focused with a frightening intensity on the uniformed attendant leading us through the labyrinthine corridors to the vault. I walked beside her, the calm to her storm, my heart a conflicted drama of ancient maternal instinct and my new unwavering resolve. This was the precipice. What she chose to do with whatever we found in box 712 would tell me everything about how far she had truly come, or how devastatingly far she still had to fall. The vault door was a monumental thing, a foot thick of polished steel that swung open with a deep, resonant groan that seemed to echo in my soul. Inside, thousands of safety deposit boxes formed a grid of silent secrets. The attendant located 712, slid it from its resting place, and carried it with a practiced reverence to a private viewing room, setting it on a solid oak table under the soft glow of a green-shaded lamp. He withdrew with a silent nod, closing the door and leaving us alone with my husband's final mystery. Sophia's hands trembled violently as she inserted the key.
The lock turned with a smooth, well-oiled click. She lifted the lid. There was no cash, no stock certificates, no easy salvation. Instead, nestled against a bed of faded dark blue velvet, lay a collection of my mother's jewelry, the physical poetry of our family's history. A simple but exquisite strand of natural pearls, each one a luminous moon, that David had given me on our 10th anniversary after saving for 2 years. A pair of Art Deco emerald and diamond earrings that had belonged to his grandmother, a woman who had survived the Depression with nothing but her wits and this very pair of earrings sewn into the hem of her dress. A heavy, ornate gold bracelet from my own mother, a man's platinum signet ring from his father. David's father's. Each piece was accompanied by a small, typed card in David's hand, noting its provenance and a conservative, approximate value. The total, I calculated quickly, was a little over $200,000, a fortune to my destitute daughter, a pittance to the woman I had become, a treasure beyond price to the wife I had been. Sophia's breath hitched, a sharp, hungry sound in the quiet room. "Mom," she whispered, her voice full of awe and a desperate, clawing hope. It's a treasure. Look at these pieces. The clarity of these emeralds. This could solve everything. I could pay off the most pressing debts, get the banks off my back. They're heirlooms, Sophia," I said gently, my voice a soft, deliberate counterpoint to her rising, frantic excitement. I picked up the pearls, their cool, smooth surface a tactile memory of David's hands, fastening them around my neck on a long-ago anniversary. "Your great-grandmother's emeralds, the pearls your father gave me the night we renewed our vows in that little inn in Carmel. They're not just assets, they're memories, they're love made solid." "I know, Mom, I know," she said, her words tumbling out in a rushed, frantic plea as she clutched the emerald earrings, a direct piece of her lineage, to a bored, cynical appraiser in a fluorescently lit shop on Post Street. He examined them with a cold, disinterested efficiency. A loop grunted about a tiny inclusion and offered a price that was a robbery of both money and memory. "I remember Grandma wearing these," she whispered to me, her voice thick as the man placed them on a scale. "At Christmas, she'd let me touch them, told me they were magic." The memory seemed to physically wound her, and she looked away as he wrote the check. I saw her jaw tighten, a muscle flickering, as she negotiated the price of my pearls, reducing a decade of my happy marriage, of whispered "I love yous" and slow dances in the kitchen, to a number on a check. She was methodical, practical, and utterly heartbreaking. She raised $180,000. To her, it was a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. To me, it was the final, costly tuition fee for the education she was only just beginning to understand. She spent her days tethered to our landline, her voice a strained, polite monotone as she spoke with creditors, and her nights spread out on the kitchen table, organizing spreadsheets under the warm glow of the lamp, the same table where her father had once helped her with her algebra homework. The entitled, carefree socialite was gone, replaced by a weary, determined woman navigating a labyrinth of her own creation. The transformation was both brutal and beautiful to witness. Then came the job. She'd seen an ad taped to a bus stop. Night shift cleaner, Union Square offices, immediate start. She told me over a dinner of simple pasta, her eyes avoiding mine. "I start tomorrow night, Mom. The pay isn't much, but it's something." The first night was the hardest. I waited up, a novel unread in my lap, listening for her return. When she finally came through the door at 4 a.m., she moved like a woman twice her age. Her shoulders were slumped with a bone-deep exhaustion I had never seen in her before. The sharp, acrid scent of industrial cleaner clung to her clothes and hair, replacing her usual Chanel No. 5. A smudge of grime marked her cheek. I rose to help her, but she waved me off. "Don't, Mom. I can do it," she mumbled, her voice raspy. She didn't head for the shower. Instead, she sank into a chair at the kitchen table, staring at her raw, reddened hands. I scrubbed 12 bathrooms tonight. 12. And I mopped what felt like a mile of hallway. Mrs. Johnson, she's been there 20 years, she showed me how to use the floor buffer. It almost threw me into a wall. A strange, choked sound escaped her, halfway between a laugh and a sob. I was so bad at it. I'm bad at cleaning floors, Mom. I said nothing, just poured her a glass of water. This was her battlefield, and I could not fight for her.
The second week, she came home with a different kind of weariness. One of the executives left a half-eaten sandwich in his trash, she told me, her voice flat. A $50 sandwich from that fancy place downstairs. He just threw it away. I stood there, looking at it, and I thought about how many hours I'd have to work to afford that sandwich. It was a strange feeling. It was after a month of this grueling routine that the real shift began. She came home one morning not just tired, but with a quiet light in her eyes. Mrs. Johnson's daughter is sick. She couldn't afford the doctor, so I gave her some of the money from my first paycheck. She said it so simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The Sophia of old would have written a check for a charity gala for the publicity. This Sophia gave her own hard-earned cash to a struggling coworker, in secret, expecting nothing in return. It was the first green shoot of a new character breaking through the scorched earth. It was in that moment, watching her place that insignificant yet profoundly significant $20 bill on the table, that I knew. The lesson was almost complete. She had hit the bedrock of her own soul and found, to her astonishment, that it was solid. She had discovered a value system that no market crash and no fraudulent husband could ever take from her. It was time. Mr. Thorne's call the next morning was the final piece. Eleanor, his voice was calm, but held a note of triumph. We have it all. Edward was arrested in Paris at Charles de Gaulle attempting to board a flight to Switzerland. The French authorities were most cooperative. We have sworn affidavits from a handwriting expert, forensic document analysis, even a statement from the young woman he was with confirming he bragged about forging Sophia's signature. It's conclusive, irrefutable proof. She is legally free and clear of every cent of his debt. The process is complete. I took a deep, steadying breath, the weight of the last few months lifting from my shoulders, leaving behind a profound, quiet peace. Schedule the meeting, Alistair. It's time for my daughter to learn the whole truth. The following Friday, I told Sophia I had managed, through a friend of a friend, to secure a pro bono consultation with a top-tier legal expert who specialized in financial fraud and might be able to advise on her debt situation. She was skeptical, her spirit too bruised to believe in easy solutions, terrified of another devastating dead end. But the flicker of hope in her eyes was genuine now, born of her own effort, not of avarice. She dressed in her best remaining outfit, a simple black dress that now hung loosely on her thinner frame, and held my hand on the bus ride to Mr. Thorne's office, her grip tight and slightly damp with nervous anticipation. Mr. Thorne greeted us at the door to his corner office, the panoramic view of the Bay Bridge behind him, a symbol of the connected world Sophia had once taken for granted. Mrs. Vance, Miss Vance, thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing us, Sophia began, her voice tight with the familiar defensive anxiety. But I have to be honest, I have no way to pay for a lawyer of your caliber. That, Mr. Thorne interrupted gently, his eyes flicking to me with a knowing look, will not be necessary. Why don't you start by reviewing these documents? He slid a thick, cream-colored folder across the vast expanse of his polished mahogany desk. Sophia opened the folder, her eyes scanning the first page. I watched, my heart a steady, calm beat, as the play of emotions unfolded on her face. Initial confusion,
then dawning comprehension, then stunned, utter disbelief. She flipped page after page, her movements becoming more frantic. I don't understand. These are debt absolutions? Letters from the banks? These say Edward forged that I'm not responsible? That the claims are invalid? How is this possible? Who did this? Who paid for this? Mr. Thorne looked at me and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Sophia, I said, my voice quiet but clear, cutting through the hushed, tense atmosphere of the room. There's something I need to tell you. Her eyes, wide and bewildered, shot to mine. What, Mom? The words were a fragile whisper. Your father? He left me more than just a box of jewelry. Much, much more. I nodded to Mr. Thorne. He opened a second, larger, leather-bound folder and placed it reverently before her. This one contained the full, unvarnished truth. The property deeds for the Nob Hill condo, the Napa Valley Hotel, the Pacific Crest Towers, the bank statements from Swiss and Cayman Island institutions with balances that defied belief, the corporate structure of Vance Legacy Holdings, with my name listed as the sole principal and shareholder. Sophia read in silence for what felt like an eternity, the only sound the soft, frantic rustle of expensive paper. Her face went pale, then flushed with hot, creeping shame. She looked from the documents to me, then back again. The pieces of the last few months, my calmness, my lack of panic, the miraculously swift return of the cabin, this meeting, crashing together in a cataclysm of understanding that was almost physically violent. The Pacific Crest Towers? She stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the deed. You own my building? You've always owned it? It wasn't a question. It was a stunned, horrifying realization. Yes. A terrible pause. The eviction notice? From me. The blood drained completely from her face. You knew all of this? When I came back from Italy, when I was crying on your shoulder every night, when I was cleaning offices and selling Grandma's jewels? Her voice was a tremulous, broken whisper, laced with a sense of betrayal so profound it seemed to shake her entire body. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the devastating electricity of a shattered reality. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as her gentle, predictable mother, but as a stranger, a strategist, a queen who had silently reclaimed her kingdom. Then, the question I had been waiting for, the one that held the key to her ultimate redemption, finally came, wrenched from the depths of her soul. Why? She breathed, her eyes glistening with unshed tears of shock and hurt. Why would you let me suffer like that? Why did you let me sell pieces of our family? Why did you watch me break myself cleaning floors when you could have snapped your fingers and made it all go away? Why didn't you just help me? I leaned forward, my own eyes never leaving hers, and allowed her to see the complex tapestry of love, pain, and determination there. Because you needed to learn something, Sophia, something I could never teach you with words or money, a lesson that can only be written on the heart through experience. You needed to learn the real, tangible value of what you had so carelessly thrown away, the value of family, of respect, of hard, honest work. When you abandoned me, you didn't just take my money. You took my dignity, my trust. You treated our history as a commodity, and I couldn't just give that back to you. You had to earn it back for yourself. You had to understand the weight of your choices by feeling their full consequences. The tears spilled over then, streaming down her face, but they weren't the tears of self-pity or rage I had seen before. They were tears of painful, searing, undeniable clarity. It was the moment the student truly understands the lesson. You let me fall, she whispered, the truth dawning in her eyes, so I would learn how to get back up, on my own.
Yes. Mr. Thorne quietly excused himself, leaving us alone in the sunlit office, the proof of our fortune and our fracture spread out between us. Sophia stared at the documents, at the overwhelming evidence of a power I had held all along, a power I had chosen not to use to rescue her, but to rebuild her. A long time passed before she spoke again, her voice raw but clear. "The job," she said finally, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand, smudging the last of her makeup, and in that moment, she had never looked more beautiful to me. "At the cleaning company. Do you want me to quit?" "That is your decision and yours alone," I said, "but I hope you don't." "Why?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her tone. "Because that job isn't a punishment. It's a reminder. It's teaching you the dignity of your own effort, the true weight of a dollar you earn yourself. That understanding, that self-respect, is a lesson worth more than any of this." I gestured to the papers symbolizing our immense fortune. She was silent for another long moment, absorbing this, her gaze turning inward. Then she straightened her shoulders, a new, quiet, unshakable strength settling into her posture. It was the posture of David. It was the posture of me. "I'm going to keep it," she declared, "and I'm going to pay you back. For the groceries, the utilities, my share of the mortgage, every penny. I'm going to pay for everything." "Sophia, you don't have to." "Yes, I do, Mom," she said, her voice firm, resolute, filled with a purpose I had never heard before. "I need this. I need our relationship to be different. I don't want to be the daughter who takes you for granted anymore. I don't want your love to be a safety net I expect to find whenever I fall. I want to be the woman who stands beside you, as an equal, as a partner." In that moment, in that sun-drenched office high above the city, the education of Sophia Vance was complete. The mother I had mourned was gone, but in her place stood a woman of character, of strength, of humility, a woman I was not just obligated to love, but profoundly proud to call my daughter. We left Mr. Thorne's office hand in hand, the dynamic between us forever altered. We decided, together, to turn the Lake Tahoe cabin into David's Haven, a sanctuary for women and children rebuilding their lives after financial abuse and betrayal. The planning became our shared passion. Sophia, with her newfound understanding of budgets and sheer grit, took the lead on the renovations, negotiating with contractors and sourcing materials with a fierce practicality that would have made her father beam. I handled the legal and financial frameworks, our skills complementing each other perfectly. She used her own hard-earned savings from her cleaning job to help a coworker, a single mother named Maria, pay for her son's daycare, refusing to touch the reclaimed jewel money, which she placed in a trust for the shelter. "This money feels clean, Mom," she told me. "It's mine. That other money, it's tainted with everything that happened. Let it do some good now." She enrolled in community college to become a financial counselor, her own painful experience giving her an empathy and credibility no textbook could ever provide. "I want to help people see the warning signs," she told me one evening, her textbooks spread across the table. "Not just the financial ones, but the emotional ones. I want to give them the strength I had to find the hard way." The final, lingering ghost of the past arrived months later, a letter from Edward, postmarked from a French prison, full of florid apologies and pleas for forgiveness, blaming his actions on pressure and circumstance. Sophia read it once, her face a calm, unreadable mask, then folded it neatly and tossed it into the recycling bin without a single word of commentary. "That chapter is over," was all she said, and I knew with absolute certainty that she was free. She was no longer defined by his betrayal, but by her own resilience. That night, I sat on the porch of our reclaimed cabin at Lake Tahoe, a thick wool blanket around my shoulders, looking up at a sky dusted with a billion brilliant stars. The lake was a sheet of black glass, reflecting the cosmos.
Inside, Sophia was on the phone, calmly walking a terrified young woman through the first steps of leaving an abusive marriage and securing her finances. The sound of her voice, steady, compassionate, and strong, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "We did it, David," I whispered into the cool, pine-scented mountain air. "Our girl was lost, but she found her way home. And my God, the woman she has become." And for the first time since his death, I felt his answer not as a memory or a hope, but as an absolute certainty that filled my entire being. A warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket and everything to do with peace. It was a feeling of a job well done, a circle closed, a legacy secured not in wealth, but in wisdom. "She learned it from the best, my love," the feeling whispered. "She learned it from you." That night, I sat on the porch of our reclaimed cabin at Lake Tahoe, a thick wool blanket around my shoulders, looking up at a sky dusted with a billion brilliant stars. The lake was a sheet of black glass, reflecting the cosmos. Inside, Sophia was on the phone, calmly walking a terrified young woman through the first steps of leaving an abusive marriage and securing her finances. The sound of her voice, steady, compassionate, and strong, was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. "We did it, David," I whispered into the cool, pine-scented mountain air. "Our girl was lost, but she found her way home. And my God, the woman she has become." And for the first time since his death, I felt his answer not as a memory or a hope, but as an absolute certainty that filled my entire being. A warmth that had nothing to do with the blanket and everything to do with peace. It was a feeling of a job well done, a circle closed, a legacy secured not in wealth, but in wisdom. "She learned it from the best, my love," the feeling whispered. "She learned it from you." The months that followed were a testament to that transformation. Sophia continued her work, both at the cleaning company and in her studies, with a focus that was breathtaking to witness. She'd come home from a long night of mopping floors, her body weary but her spirit alight with a new purpose. She would shower, change, and then spend hours at the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in concentration over her textbooks for her financial counseling certification. "The psychology of financial abuse is just as important as the numbers, Mom," she'd tell me, her highlighter flying across the pages. "It's about control. It's about isolation. I see it so clearly now." I watched her help her first official clients through the foundation we'd established. There was Lena, a young mother who had fled her husband with nothing but her 2 children and a suitcase. Sophia didn't just help her navigate the bureaucracy of securing housing assistance. She sat with her for hours, listening to her story, her voice a steady anchor in Lena's storm. She showed her how to create a basic budget, not with condescension, but with the empathy of someone who truly understood the shame and fear that came with financial dependence. She even helped Lena get a job interview at the very cleaning company she worked for, vouching for her character. Watching my daughter become someone's lifeline, the way Mr. Thorne had been mine, filled me with a pride so immense it was almost dizzying. Our own relationship settled into a new, beautiful rhythm. True to her word, Sophia insisted on contributing to the household expenses. Every 2 weeks, she would place a carefully calculated sum of money in a jar on the kitchen counter, her share of the groceries, the utilities, a token toward the mortgage. It was never about the amount. It was about the principle. That simple act was her daily reaffirmation of the woman she had chosen to become, responsible, independent, and respectful. We were no longer mother and daughter in the old hierarchical sense. We were partners, co-conspirators in doing good, and best friends. We'd spend our Sunday mornings reading the paper together, discussing articles, debating politics, and planning the next phase for David's Haven. The silence between us was no longer fraught with tension or unspoken hurts. It was the comfortable, easy silence of 2 people who were perfectly content in each other's company. One evening, about a year after our meeting in Mr. Thorne's office, we were sitting on that same Tahoe porch. The first family to stay at David's Haven, a woman and her teenage son, had just left, armed with new hope and a solid financial plan crafted by Sophia. The cabin was quiet again, filled only with the whisper of the pines. "Mom," Sophia said, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just told me the truth that first day? If you'd shown me the documents and given me the money?" "Every day," I answered honestly. "And?" "And I know, with every fiber of my being, that it would have been the worst mistake of my life. You would have paid the debts, been furious with Edward for a time, and then you would have slipped back into that life, perhaps with a new man, but with the same emptiness. The money would have been a bandage on a wound that needed surgery. You needed to heal from the inside out." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the star-dusted lake. "I was so angry with you. For weeks after that meeting, a part of me was so furious. I felt manipulated, tricked." "I know. But that anger, it forced me to look at myself, really look, and I didn't like what I saw. The anger was easier than facing the shame. You forcing me to face that shame, to work through it with my own two hands, that was the real gift, not the money, the self-respect." She turned to me, her eyes shining in the moonlight. "Thank you, Mom, for having the strength to do what I thought was cruel, but was really the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." I reached out and took her hand, the same hand that had been calloused from scribbing floors and was now skilled at typing reports and offering comfort. We sat there in the profound quiet, two women forged in different fires, now stronger together than we ever could have been apart. David's legacy was not the properties or the bank accounts. It was this unbreakable bond, this hard-won wisdom, this quiet, steadfast love that had been tested in the fiercest of fires and had emerged not as ash, but as diamond. The story of Eleanor and Sophia is more than a tale of betrayal and redemption. It is a profound lesson in the true nature of love and legacy. Eleanor teaches us that love is not always about shielding or rescuing. Sometimes the most powerful love is having the courage to step back and allow those we cherish to stumble, to feel the full weight of their choices, and to find their own strength in the aftermath. Her silent revenge was, in fact, a deep and disciplined act of love, a refusal to enable destructive patterns, and a bold investment in her daughter's long-term character over short-term comfort. The ultimate revelation is that true wealth has nothing to do with bank statements and everything to do with the resilience of the human spirit, the dignity of honest work, and the unbreakable bonds forged through shared trials. David's real inheritance was not the hidden fortune, but the wisdom and love he instilled in Eleanor, which she in turn used to save their daughter's soul. For anyone facing betrayal or watching a loved one make destructive choices, this story offers a powerful blueprint. It challenges us to move beyond the impulse to simply fix and control, and instead to trust in the transformative power of consequences and the innate strength within each person to rise again. The greatest gift we can give is not a handout, but the tools and the tough love necessary for someone to rebuild themselves. In the end, justice is not about punishment, but about education, and the most valuable legacy we can leave is not one of money, but one of character, wisdom, and a love that is strong enough to be silent and powerful enough to transform.